You're about to see one of my best attacking games. That said, I'm not an attacking player at all. I'm rather a universal player, even leaning to a controlled positional style. But as you know, you first and foremost have to play the requirements of the position. And the opening, which occurred here, was asking for a rapid and ruthless play. d4, knight f6. By the way, this game was played in 1990 in Novi Sad, as you can see below the diagram. It was the Olympiads, so I played for the German national team in this event. c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7. Nowadays I have a very pessimistic view on the King's Indian. I consider it a flawed opening, but back then in the 90s it was still playable. The theory was not as developed, the engines were not really existing there, so you had much more liberty to play substandard variations. Funnily enough, I played one of my most beautiful and entertaining games with this opening, the King's Indian. e4, d6, f3. This is a Saemisch variation. Castles. And now the normal move is bishop e3, but my opponent, he played bishop g5. Actually, UNESCO is one of the, or was at the time of playing this game, I don't know about the present, he was one of the leading experts of this line. One of the benefits of bishop g5 is that, for instance, now e5 is completely bad due to de takes knight d5, and now black is on the verge of losing. His best bet would be to take the knight and play knight e3, but white at least is clearly better here. So the best recipe against bishop c5 is to play this position Benoni style by pushing the c-pawn. d5, e6, queen d2, takes. So now we have a modern Benoni structure on the board. This position can also arise via the genuine Benoni move order. Here we went through the path of the King's Indian. Now in this position I played a sideline. I played the move bishop d7. Playing sidelines has their pros and cons, right? Objectively this line is bad, but it can surprise your opponent. I mean, this is what's valid for sidelines in general. So sometimes you manage to leave your opponent on his or to his own devices, and we all know what can happen then, right? So it's a very pragmatic approach. I will come back to this move later. Let's first say what would be better for black here, because some of you play this line with black. There are a lot of King's Indian players around. It's a very popular opening on club player level, so you might be interested on how black should handle this position. a6 is the right move, threatening b5. White has to prevent it. And now h6. If white takes his pawn, we see a forced line for a couple of moves. Knight e4, check. This is a point. g3, queen takes, h6. And of course now white has to grab the pawn. Otherwise he would be worse without his dark squared bishop. And now after knight e7, black has enough compensation for the pawn. He has a Latin development, and the two bishops will follow up with knight b6 or knight e5. So rather than taking on h6, white should play bishop e3. And now black answers rook e8. Now the knight on g1 is a bit of a problem here. It cannot go to h3. One move would be bishop e2, just a waiting move. So if now black would play bishop knight d7, then knight h3 followed by knight f2 would solve white's problem. And actually with a knight on f2, white can later play f4 because the knight is supporting the e-pawn. But black just plays h5, now solving the problem of this potentially hanging pawn here. And this position can be called equal. There was an interesting blitz game between Ding Liren and Magnus Carlsen in 2022. Ding played bishop c4, which is preparing for knight ge2. Now Magnus, he should have actually, or could have played h5, and after knight ge2, knight d7, the position is equal. Magnus played knight bd7. This was not a mistake yet. And now bishop e2. It looks a bit funny to go first to c4 and then e2. But now, of course, the knight on d7 would allow for knight h3. Magnus now saw this and played knight e5, but this was a mistake. Now Ding took on h6, this is possible. And now, well, Magnus should just have sacrificed his pawn by bishop takes, followed by bishop d7. But this is plus equal. He instead took on e4. But now we see knight e4 coming, check. And you see the problem now. This is this check here on f6. So Ding was clearly better and he won this blitz game on chess 24. After bishop e2, the best move is rook b8. Now bishop h6, knight e4 would be bad for white, so knight h3. But now we see b5 coming, takes, knight b5, knight e4. It's quite wild. This is what you are signing up if you play the King's Indian or the Benoni, of course. So this is a piece sacrifice, right? And after knight f2, rook b4, knight d1, protecting b2. And now rook takes b5. We have seen black having a slight material disadvantage, but as a compensation for the exchange, she has one pawn, a bishop pair, and we see two weak pawns in white's camp, b2 and d5. This position is equal. So after a6, a4, rook e8, h6, bishop e2, rook e8, black has equality. Altogether, we can conclude that the line bishop g5 is nothing to be feared. So this was the theoretical part of this video. Now let's come back to the move bishop d7. The bishop is preparing b5. So if now white, who cannot put the knight to h3, would choose knight e2, black could play b5. Even though white still has a slight advantage here, but this is at least the idea of bishop d7, preparing b5. Maybe I should also say some words regarding the history of this move. This move was invented by the legendary Hungarian attacking player Bela Perenyi, who unfortunately died at a young age, was 35 in a car accident. Perenyi was known as a very vivid attacking player who also contributed to opening theory. If he would be still around today, we would have seen a lot of impact on opening theory by him, I'm quite sure. Let me just show you his most famous contribution to chess theory, the Perenyi attack and the knight off. Just a quick intermezzo here. So bishop e3, the most important line against the knight of nowadays. And now after e6, g4 is called the Perenyi attack. It's very aggressive because it implies a piece sacrifice. White now is forced to play e5. If white is not playing e5, he's just stuck in a very bad line of the Saemisch Keres attack. So if black plays knight c6, g5, white is already clearly better. e5 is the only move. And now g6, of course, is the critical test. The knight cannot go back to g3 as the g4 pawn would fall. So you have to leave the knight f5 hanging. For instance, I mean, there's also the, I say for instance because there's also the line, I think bishop g2 here. But the main line is g5, and now after gf, you don't take the knight, on f6, you take the pawn. And now the main line is d5, and this is really crazy stuff. Queen f3, d4, forking two pieces, castling, knight bd7, and now one of the lines is bishop c4, and you see this is a complete mess here. So very dangerous for black if black doesn't know what to do. If black plays e6 against the bishop e3 variation, he must be acquainted with the Perenyi attack. So to honor Bela Perenyi, I just propose to give his name also to this line here, to the bishop d7 line. He earns it because he was the first player to choose bishop d7 in my database, in ChessBase online database. He played it in 1983. But other players also should get some merits here. The second game actually in this line was played by my opponent, by Ionescu, in the game Ionescu Adeleanu. So Adeleanu was the second player. He played it in 1986. In that game, by the way, Ionescu could not really convince, he lost. So this was one of the reasons I chose the line against him. But now comes something interesting. The third game with this line was Rajkovic-Martin, 1989. We're talking about Andrew Martin, who wrote the book Winning with the King's Indian, which he published in 1989 and which I was a buyer of. So I played some of his lines. That was a very good repertoire book by the standards of that time. And Andrew Martin also deserves some credits here for this line and for my victory here, because without him I would not have played this move. So bishop d7, what did Ionescu play here? He chose a4. By the way, the engine's darling is h4 followed by h5. Maybe the best move, but if so, not by a wide margin. The engine's move h4 might lead to a clear advantage for white, but also does the move of Ionescu. So Ionescu improved over his game against Adeleanu, where he played bishop d3. a4 is a good move. Knight a6, bishop c4, knight b4. This was the idea of Andrew Martin, so I followed him here. The knight, of course, now has a nice output there on b4, but take it with a grain of salt. Nice. Because in the Benoni, very often we see this knight standing apparently nice on b4, but without any impact on white's position. The queen on d2 is protecting this square c2, and what can the knight on b4 do? Anything else than maybe jumping to c2 at a given moment. The problem with the knight on b4 is that it does not anything to promote the pawn thrust b7, b5. So another way to deploy the knight hence is to play to c7 followed by a6. The knight is supporting b5. On b4 it doesn't support the knight. It looks beautiful, but sometimes it's ineffective there. This is a typical Benoni pattern. Many of you will be aware of this already. Knight g2, a6. Black has to try to push b7, b5. And now my opponent made a mistake. He should have castled here. So the correct line would be castling short. I might have played then rook b8, threatening b5, and only now, after black spent a move on preparing b5, a5 should happen. He did it all outright. He played a5 instead of castling. This was premature. I will show you in a bit why. So now what can I do except of pushing the pawn? Pretty much forced. Now the idea is bishop b5. If I would be to move again, I could easily equalize here. Bishop b5. If the bishop took on b5, a b5, this would improve my pawn structure. And maybe then I could play c5, c4 later, having the squares d3 and b3 available for my knights. And if white would defend his bishop with b3, so I'm playing bishop b5 here, he plays b3, then the idea knight d7 followed by knight e5, or first taking on c4, bc4, and then knight e5, winning that pawn, is the way to play it for black. But now comes a good move here. This is a novelty. Knight b1 exclamation mark. These moves are not easily to find because removing a knight to the first rank is something which is often overlooked as a possibility. But here it's about the square c4. That's the key square. So knight, bishop b5, and now the knight can lend support to the bishop. And of course, if I would now take his bishop on c4 in this line, the knight would end up on its favorite square in this specific Benoni structure. So let's say knight d7, knight c3, and now if I took here, now you see the b5 bishop is under pressure. So if I abandon now my bishop there by taking, the knight would end up on c4, and now the bishop on f4, forcing me to play knight e5 with a clear advantage here for white. This is a busted Benoni. So the best chance would be to sacrifice the pawn on b5, knight e5, instead of taking on c4, but after takes, rook b7, bishop e7 was a threat, f4, f5 exclamation mark. We see white standing clearly better. I cannot take here on b2 because knight c4, attacking the queen, takes, and now you see the dark squares here on my king side are quite weak. Here white is winning. If I take the knight, bishop f6, threatening queen h6 would finish me off. Well, I don't know what I would have played. The question is, would he have found knight b1 here? Maybe. This would have been more or less the refutation. That's why I don't recommend you to play the bishop d7 line, except for blitz games, of course, or maybe rapid games. Okay, let's go back to our game here. After a6, he didn't castle, which would have been better, as I just explained. He played a5 immediately, and that was a mistake. Now I took the chance and pulled off a typical Benoni motive. Because I was playing the modern Benoni prior to this game. I think by the midst of the 80s I played the modern Benoni. There was a time I played the Nimzo Indian, and against third knight f3 I didn't want to play Queen's Indian, but I played the modern Benoni. So I knew some Benoni motives, and one of these motives is bishop b5. I think this is the best move here. I mean, b5 is also possible, but bishop b5 is quite attractive for black because it puts white under enormous pressure here. So now you see that I not only profit from him making this square b5 available to my bishop, I also profit from the fact that my rook is not yet on b8. So he should have waited with a5, you know, until I played rook b8, because now the rook has some activity here down the a file if the bishop is taken. In the game he played b3, and this was quite wise. Let's first see what would have happened if he took the pawn. So first the bishop and then the pawn, right? If he would win this pawn, but of course it's not really winning a pawn because the a5 pawn will fall in the process. Takes, 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 and you see now my queen is very active. He cannot take on d6 now, because after queen a6 his knight cannot return. He has to play e5, but now I have this nice check here, and after knight d5 I'm winning. So what can he do? He could play knight ec3 supporting his b5 knight, but then I give a nice check here on a1. Well, his rook would be hanging on h1. He cannot play the queen to c1 because I would win it with knight d3 check. So actually knight d1 is the only move. If he plays queen d1, I can take on b2, for instance. So knight d1 only move, and now I go to a6. This is the square I wanted to use anyways, but by first luring the knight back to the first rank, I'm winning a tempo. So this actually is another example of the double step. Viewers of my videos, of my previous videos, know that I was giving some examples of the double step earlier. And so now this move queen a1 followed by queen a6 is a double stack. So I don't go to h6 outright in order to defend my d6 pawn. I first misplace the knight c3. So first this check, knight must go back, and now, only now, queen a6, he has to return, and that way I received the move queen a6 free of charge. So as it is my move now, I can continue with pressurizing him. Knight a2. I want to undermine this b5 knight here. Okay, if he castles now, I take on c3. He has to recapture with the knight, and then I can push b5. So let's say he takes here, takes, knight c3, queen a6. This position is clearly better here for me. For instance, yeah, what can he do? Bishop h6 is the best move, but I can push b5 and I'm clearly better. This is a typical positive Benoni outcome where black is able to exploit his queenside majority more than white can use his central majority. Queen e2 now would be a mistake. c4, castles, knight d7. And I would be able to follow up with b5 and then maybe knight c5, knight d3. And then the bishop g7 would also exert a lot of pressure on that long diagonal. His b2 pawn would be very weak. That's a nightmare for white in the Benoni structure. Another move would be knight b5, but also here after ab, bishop b5 takes, knight c3, h6. Black is having the initiative. For instance, he cannot take here because now after knight a2, I'm exploiting the poor position of the bishop b5. I undermine the bishop, attacking the knight c3. This is winning. What else can you do? After h6, he should play bishop e3. But again, I play knight a2, undermining the b5 piece. For instance, knight takes a2, queen b5, queen b3, castles, rook a8, and black is having the initiative here. I would be clearly better here if white doesn't find the move e5. e5 now is the only move keeping white in the game. Otherwise I would be clearly better. So better than taking on b5 was his move b3. He's stabilizing his bishop here. This is a typical pattern. Maybe he was relying on that. Maybe he didn't fear bishop b5 because he was thinking, well, the pieces are quite interestingly arranged here, my pieces on the queen side, but what am I going to do to improve the pressure? Maybe he overlooked my next move. By the way, this Benoni structure, for those who don't know it yet, is generally problematic for black in a static point, from a static perspective. White has, you see, quite a nice central barrier here. White has a majority, 2 versus 1 in the center. So the push e4, e5 later is one of the ways to refute or to try to refute black's setup. Normally you want to have as many pawns in the center as your opponent, and here black has the bishop pawn c5 versus white's e pawn. From a long-term static perspective, white has a better pawn structure, but black has quite active piece play. Now, if black is not using the dynamic potential of his pieces short term, if he lingers, if he's not using the window of opportunity which sometimes opens for him to become active, then he will be stuck in a quite desolate position. So white's idea is to castle, to consolidate his position, and maybe also to kick out the knight b4 with knight a2, and maybe then come with b3 b4, which is another idea in this structure. So black has to do something quick. This is no time for caution. I have to speed up here because my static situation is bad. So I have to play the dynamics of the position. And the dynamic move is h6. Now, there's only one good move. Let's first deal with the bad moves. The worst of all is bishop h4, because now I can use the unprotected status of that bishop to use this typical tactics here. Queen h4 is a threat, but if he takes here, I take his queen, and I'm winning. The second worst move is bishop e3, question mark. Now I take on c4. In general, this would not be a problem for white, because white has a good pawn structure, and if he could get rid of this knight here with rook a2, with knight a2 later, and then maybe having pressure on the b file and using his majority on the king side, he would be clearly better. But I have this knight d7 idea. Now the c4 pawn is very weak. He cannot take on h6 now because I have this check here, typical motive. But he cannot castle either. If he castles, I play knight e5, winning the c4 pawn. Thanks to my knight on b4, he cannot play queen a2. So only move after knight d7 is bishop f4, attacking my pawn. And if I would now play knight e5, he just takes my knight and would stand clearly better here. But now queen h4 is the best move. Bishop g3, queen e7, defending the pawn, castling, and now b6, very strong. He cannot take on b6, as after knight takes b6 he would lose his c4 pawn again. So what else could he do? He could play rook a3, removing his rook from the long diagonal. But now after rook f b8, I'm ready to push b6, b5. And this gives me a clear advantage. He still cannot take on b3 due to knight takes b6 followed by knight takes c4. So bishop e3 is bad. What about bishop takes h6? This move is playable, but leads to slight advantage for black because I pick up the exchange here. White has one pawn and of course the better pawn structure here, but I have some material advantage. Black is slightly better here. This leaves him with only one move after h6. This is bishop f4, only move. And now, as I mentioned before, I cannot linger because if white is able to consolidate his position, he would be clearly better. He has a better pawn structure. So I have to play very fast here. Knight h5, attacking his bishop. Now came a mistake by him. He played bishop e3. Here he was forced to capture on h6. Takes, knight c2, winning the exchange, but the position is unclear. Now the best move is queen e7, and it's unclear. He could try to attack here, g4, knight f6, h4, but I play the knight to d7, and if you play g5, knight e5, I'm doing fine here. So he must deviate before, but the position is equal according to the engine all the way. But instead of a bishop takes h6, giving the exchange, he had to play dynamically. He played the conservative bishop e3. And now I could finally push f5. In the Benoni you don't only have the push b7, b5, which is of course not possible right now. You also have f5 as a pawn push. And this is what I was doing. This position is extremely interesting here. I already have the initiative and he has to be extremely careful. His move was rook a3 in order to mobilize his knight. His idea was to play knight a2, getting rid of my b4 knight, and then he could make progress on the queen side later on. This was a mistake, however. I will show you in a bit why. What he should have done was either bishop h6 or better casting short. So after bishop takes h6, I check. Now he cannot play g3 because after knight g3, I'm winning here because I'm getting hold of his dark squared bishop, which would finish him off completely. He has now to move his king into the center, or he has to stay in the center. And now after rook a8, I sacrifice the pawn, but as a result he has the king in the center, and of course his rooks are not coordinated, and I have some pressure in the middle of the board. This is slightly better for black according to the engine. Maybe the best move is castles. So instead of bishop takes h6 or his move rook a3, he should have castled. I play f4, bishop f2, bishop d7, rook a3, and now g5. This is a typical idea in this position, in this f4 structure, pushing the g pawn to g4 in order to attack. But now white can play knight f4, only move, giving the pawn on a5. Okay, I take. Now he can take on c5, offering the exchange, which of course I have to take the rook now. Taking on d7, and now it's not really good to move my rook away. I think because of knight b6, so after rook d8, knight b6, attacking the other rook, that would not be good for me. I have to play b5 here. And after knight f8, rook f8, black has some initiative, but not really a lot. So this position is more or less equal, with black being on the better side of equality. This would have been the correct line, but he played rook a3. It's a standard move, but as you know, chess is a very concrete game, and often it's not enough to go along standard procedures. You have to use hard calculation, at least in sharp positions such as this one here. But as you know, one mistake rarely comes alone. Now I answered with a counter mistake. I played f4, which is the standard move. So f4, so I also played by the standard lines here, but that was a mistake. This leaves it leaves him off the hook, right? Because he could equalize after that, which he then didn't finally, but that's another story. Let's first see what I should have done better. The best move here is queen h4 check. So if he now plays g3, I can simply take. Of course, the pawn is pinned, so he has to take with the knight, but now f4 is a nice and easy way to proceed. Bishop f2. I mean, he cannot really give up his dark squared bishop here. Takes, takes. But now after queen f6, there is no convenient way to protect the knight. If the knight goes somewhere, e2, I can take on f3, which would be game over on the spot. So after queen h4 check, only move is bishop f2. And now the strong move is queen g5, and it's very well possible, and I don't remember what went through my head. It was a long time ago, as you know. But I could imagine that I kind of sifted out this line because I couldn't imagine that exchanging queens could be good, because I was setting myself into attacking mode, right? Fast play, attacking. This was my program for this position here. And now I'm exchanging queens, but after the exchange of queens, this position is clearly better for black. Even without queens, black has a strong initiative. So first of all, the rook here is sidelined, and yeah, has to go back to a1 into this diagonal of the bishop. Then, and this is one of the most important factors here, the knight can jump to c2 at a convenient convenient moment. The queen d2 was a natural protector of the c2 square. This queen on d2 makes this knight on b4 normally look quite awkward. I told you this before, right? But now it's exchanged. The knight is quite free and dangerous on b4. Then black also would like to continue with rook a e8, pressuring the e-pawn, and the knight is about to jump to f4, undermining the c3 knight. So this is clearly better for white. Well, I played f4. This is like a routine move here. And now I wanted to continue with this g5, g4 idea. But I did so in a bad manner. I played bishop d7. Here the move g5 would have been best. So g5, knight a2, takes, takes. And now the best move is maybe g4 outright. Takes, knight f6. You have to play dynamically in such positions, I told you. Queen takes f4. Queen e8, attacking the e-pawn. And yeah, knight takes e4 is of course a dangerous threat. It would also attack the queen, so knight g3 is forced. Takes, takes. Knight d5, attacking the queen. Queen c1, knight c3, takes. And after castling, the position is equal. I think I will now take on f2, and then we have a very unclear equal position. I also have to here be aware of knight f5 ideas, so completely equal position in an unclear manner, that is. So instead of g5, I first played bishop d7. I mean, that is not an illogical move, but playing logically doesn't mean that you play well in chess, because there are different logical ideas which are competing with each other. There's often a conflict of logical ideas, and the question which logical idea is now best is often a matter of brute calculation, and this move doesn't fit the bill. It gave him the opportunity to play knight a2 to get rid of this b4 knight. The critical test after knight a2 is queen g5, attacking the g2 pawn. And now he cannot castle, because if he does so, I'm just winning at least the exchange here. He has to play g4 or something. And then, I don't know, maybe I win even more. I think I will take on g3, h3, and then maybe rook takes f3, or first bishop f1 followed by rook f3. Well, it's completely lost. So rook g1, only move. And this looks ugly for white, because now the king is stuck in the middle of the board, right? But the center is closed, so here white is actually slightly better, even though it looks funny. In chess, very often appearances are deceptive. So let's see, knight a2, rook fb8. I have to open up the position, exploiting the bad coordination of his pieces. I mean, the rook and the king. But now he can play b4, breaking up my structure, also getting some squares for his pieces. b5 takes, check. Looks a bit dangerous for white, but actually it's not really dangerous. d takes e5, and now after a bishop g3, the rook has to leave the first rank, and white's king is okay, even though of course white has to be careful. But look at the pawn structure. He has fantastic central pawns, and I have two weak pawns on the queen side. This position is given as plus equal by the engine. Of course, complete chaos, but a bit better for white. Instead, he played a natural and safe move, safe, quote unquote safe, castling. Now I played my g5 idea, and here he committed a mistake. He played h3. He wanted to stop g4. Again, he played logical chess, but logical sometimes can be bad. Let's first have a look at what he should have done. He should have done knight a4, and actually this line we have seen earlier. There was a line where he could have castled or move 17, and it was the same position. You will remember this, where I said black is having an initiative here. And so black is a tiny bit better, but not much. This would have been the best move. Now, there's a funny story here. This very position happened in another game, which was played 1995, 5 years later. Two players from the Netherlands, De Groot against Swinkels. They played this position, and then De Groot played knight a2, which also is a mistake, as was UNESCO's move h3. So why is knight a2 bad? This will be answered by knight a2, rook a2, g4. And now there are some problems on the king side. For instance, queen e1 is not working. This is a move geared towards preventing g3 ideas, but now of course I can win the exchange because the rook is boxed in on f1. So king h1, but now this has the idea, this has the problem of allowing g3. In that game, by the way, black played bishop e5. De Groot against Swinkels, but this gave white the opportunity to answer takes, knight g1 with an unclear position. Now the knight can go to f3, or bishop e2 might come. Unclear position, but the killer move here is g3. And after bishop g1, I mean, you cannot play hc, just put it on the board here. You cannot play a move like this, because obviously this would lose the knight, right? So bishop g1 instead, and now rook c8. There is no need to hurry here on the king side, because white cannot organize a defense. White has no space at all on the king side. So now this move rook c8, an engine suggestion, is geared towards making counterplay with b4 a bit more unattractive. Rook b1, queen g5, b4. White has to seek counterplay, but now after g takes h2, now yeah, bishop h2 I think is not really good because of queen h4 followed by knight g3. Bishop f2 takes, rook f7. I guess rook takes b7 could be punished by bishop h3, attacking the rook on b7 and threatening checkmate at the same time. So rook c2, and also of course bishop. Now this was of course here in this position. The more easy way to punish rook b7 is rook takes c4. So this is why rook c2 supporting the bishop. But now after bishop e5 followed by rook g7, white will not be able to defend his king side. Coming back to our game after g5, so he did not play the best move knight a4. He didn't play the move knight a2 from that set game of the Dutch guys. He played h3, trying to stop g4. Logical move, but bad. And now, unfortunately, I played not the best move. The best move would have been bishop e5, let's say knight a2, and now g4. And actually this is winning, because after hc3, knight g3, followed by queen h4. This is a motive every King's Indian player knows. Putting the knight to g3 and then attacking on the h file. Okay, there's still a line here to be reckoned with. Takes, and now queen h6, defending against queen h4. But now we have knight c2, attacking the rook, and if rook a4 takes, queen f6, you can even exchange queens here with black and still have attacking chances, because the h file is still very dangerous. Now there is the threat of, or the idea of knight e3 in place, and let's say rook c1, knight e3. Yeah, in the long term, I mean more mid-term than long term, white has something to do against being checkmated on the h file. So this is winning for black. After f takes g4, knight g3, e4 is under pressure. So knight takes. This is just very quickly how this line would finish here. Now this looks quite playable for white at first glance, because we have a bishop pair on both sides. Black has lost a pawn, has a weak pawn on b4, and but the problem is white's king is in a cage, right? So for instance rook c2 in order to neutralize black's rooks, and now we can play rook c3. Of course it's a monster of a rook, threatening rook takes e3. This cannot be tolerated there, but now the c3 pawn together with white's bad king here is the downfall of white. So bishop c4, but now after bishop b5, just exchanging the bishop, gaining control of the c file, we see the problem of the white position. The king is in a cage, in a prison, and the first rank is very weak, and this is not defensible for white anymore. Now I didn't play bishop e5 ls. I played queen f6. There's some logic to this move. I wanted to prevent knight a2, so I wanted to play prophylactically. I thought after knight e2, which he could have done actually, I would be better with the move queen b2. This was my idea. He respected my idea, so he didn't play knight a2, but this was playable. Let's see. Takes, knight takes b4. bishop a3, so I was winning the exchange, but now comes the move. Knight d3. Maybe I finished this calculation or this line too early. This is a common mistake in calculation. Stopping your lines too early. Now the bishop is entrapped. Bishop b5, rook a1, bishop b4. Yeah, I have to abandon my precious bishop. And now after bishop b5 takes, I have a tribal pawn here. And white can play bishop e1, and then there are two pawns very weak, as you can see. So this position is very unclear. I have open files for my rooks, so this is really a complete unclear position here. Well, he respected my move, so this bluff worked quite well. It was not supposed to be a bluff, but he played rook b1. I mean, putting myself in his shoes, why bothering with an unclear line such as knight a2 if rook b1 could maybe also do the job? And the idea is to play knight a2, and if I take there, knight a2, rook e2, following up with b3, b4, destroying my queenside structure. This is a typical motive, so the rook belongs to the b file, right? So it's a natural move, and he is staying clear of complications after knight a2. But now it's my turn. This position is maybe the most interesting position at all in this game, because what I did was a very good move by human standards, but not by superhuman standards. So I played knight g3. Let you first see this move here. Knight g3 is a strong move. He cannot take twice because his knight c3 is then hanging. So this is a typical routine move. Also, if you consider the follow-up, because my follow-up was pretty strong, you will see it in a bit. But here, even though I get a clear advantage after knight g3, there's a better move. And if you want to stop on pause to find the absolute killer move, so there's a move after which white could theoretically resign, because it's lost after that move. I show you the move now. So you had your chance to press on stop. The move is queen g6. Sorry, queen g6, double exclamation mark. There are only a few moves in chess deserving a double exclaim, but this is one of them. Now, there's really one funny thing in this position, and you will not believe it at first glance. Black's next move, no matter what white will do, and there are only two exceptions, right, is g4, and black is winning. So even after bishop takes h6, which is of course crazy, couldn't be taken, but here g4 would be winning. Even after e5, which is also a bit crazy, it would just allow bishop takes e5. Even here g4 might be the best move. And only after knight takes f4 I wouldn't play g4. And also after queen takes f4 I wouldn't do so. But on any of white's moves, g4 is winning. I give you some example variations. You should try your own engine on this one here. Let's say knight d1, g4, takes. Now we sacrificed a piece, an entire piece, but white is defenseless against this f3 idea. Let's say rook a4 in order to capture on b4, getting the d4 square available for the knight. Now comes f3, knight e3, queen e4, and the position is lost. Another line, knight c1, g4 takes. If you don't take now, the problem is the g2 point. Bishop f1, knight g3, threatening knight f1, takes. If you now take here, takes, and this is just destructive pseudo sacrifice, because after king takes, f3, rook f8 followed by rook f2 check. So let's say he takes back here. Now what do you do against, there are two ideas. So we have this f3 idea, but we have also the knight g3 idea. That's a problem. You cannot really organize. You can organize against the f3 idea maybe by overprotecting g2, but now the knight comes here, and now we have this h-file attack. What else? King h2, g4 again. Takes. So now you think you have everything under control. The knight is covering f3, but still f3. And now the rook sacrifice is winning. Well, I don't want to bore you more than necessary. So this is the point. G4 is happening whatever. Of course, the hero here in this position is a pawn. Let's mark it red, f4. Also after g4, because it takes away all the squares of white's pieces. And white's pieces are placed quite clumsily here, right? Some pieces are far away off the king side, and they are really also this pawn taking away this d4 square for the pieces. White's pieces, they lack squares. They lack room for maneuvering. That's why black can play in slow motion, you know, playing g4, sacrificing the bishop, and then there is no way of stopping the attack. Okay, I'm just a human, so I didn't see this move. I played the natural knight g3. Now he made a mistake. He should have played knight a4, but after takes h5, I'm clearly better, because the push g4 or g5, g4 is hovering over his head like the sort of Damocles, right? He has no way to actively play here. Of course, he could exchange sacrifice here by taking on b4, but without any compensation, because I would be left with active pieces and the c-file. So he is completely passive and has to wait for me playing g4. This is a clear advantage. But what he did was even worse. He played knight a2. He played very consistently. This was his idea all along, to eliminate this knight and then finally push b3 before. But it was bad. And now comes a very good move by me, the follow-up. Reverse the follow-up of knight g3, it's g4. This is nothing new under the sun. It's a typical King's Indian motive, right? So it's not that I was a genius playing this move. It is clear that after hc4, and I have shown you this motive before a couple of minutes ago, we have this queen h1 problem, and if the knight on g3 is taken, there will be a problem on h2. It's standard stuff, right? But still, it's quite satisfactory to uncork this idea, knight g3 followed by g4 in a game, right? What could he have done? He took on b4. I think the best chance would have been knight f4, undermining the g3 knight. And now there are two winning lines, actually. One is a knight c2, takes this, and then this one here. And actually, this is winning. Of course, it still needs some more moves, but the engine already indicates a won position. Now, seeing this position, I wonder what happens after queen c1. I think it might be then that I would play queen f6 followed by queen h4. So the engine indicates a won position. That should be enough. Another idea is taking on f3. Bishop takes g3, and now even exchanging queens with a piece down is good here, funnily enough, because we have now knight c2, attacking the rook. Rook a4, takes, and now knight a3. And this, for some reason, is enough. So after rook c1, bishop e3. That's it. So black is ending up having extra material here. In our game, after g4, he took the knight on b4. If he wants to make some progress there, of course, he has to dissolve the Gordian knot on the queen side. So it takes. And now taking this pawn would be asking really for trouble, because the queen then would have left the king side, and now I just take on f3 and then following up with queen h4 or bishop takes h3. So he wisely left the queen on d2 and also brought his rook into the defense of the king side along the second rank. Now I took on f3, and now if he took back here after queen h4, I would be winning. So the idea is to take on h3 or to follow up with g-file play, right? Quite straightforward. Typical King's Indian attacking patterns in play here. So he took on g3, and now I had to find some other good moves here. So as you see the game so far, I found some good moves, missed some moves, made some bad moves in between, but all in all I uncorked a lot of more good moves than bad moves. So now I cannot take here, and I saw this in the game. If I take now prematurely on g3, he takes queen g6, king h2, and now black is only slightly better. Of course, it's very important if you are attacking to be precise, and the good move here is queen g6. We don't want him to organize his defenses on the king side. Of course, now he cannot move the knight because the g2 pawn is under pressure. And my threat is to take the knight followed maybe by f2. So he has to defend the knight with the king. And now again, in the same spirit, I'm not taking on g3, I'm attacking the knight once more. The knight is a sitting duck, it cannot move right now. So he has to defend this knight another time with his queen. And of course now I still have to remain patient. I play rook f7 exclamation mark. Bishop f1, finally protecting the square or the pawn g2. Now the knight would be ready to move to h1 or f5, right? But now I take on g2, the bishop has to take, and now again, patience is key. I attack that knight yet another time, and of course it cannot move away. Now the threat is to take on g3, winning a piece, so he has to move the king away. Takes, bishop e3. And now the situation looks quite good for me, right, with the pawn on g3, but still a bit of precision is needed. So queen h5, attacking the h3 pawn is a logical follow-up. Now if he would attack my queen, of course he wants to exchange queens now, I would leave my queen on the board, still attacking or leaving the h3 pawn under attack. This is the one position. Instead of that, he took on b4. Instead of playing queen e2, he took on b4. Intending maybe to get some counterplay against the b7 pawn, but I simply can take here on h3. He takes, queen takes, and now the threat is quite obviously g2 followed by queen h1. So he has to block the pawn, and now the question is, how can I make progress here? Of course, there is this plan to push the pawn to h3. And I think, if nothing else, this would do the job. So h5 is an idea here, right? h5, followed by queen g4, h4 should win. But I found something else. I played rook f8. I brought my last idle piece into play. In case of doubt, this is the best recipe, you know? If you are attacking, bring all your forces into the attack. Rook f8. What can he do? Not much. He brought back his queen to the second rank, and now the final blow of the game. Rook f2. Well, he cannot take with the rook opening the g file. He has to take with the bishop. But after g takes f2, yeah, queen f2 only move. Now I cannot play bishop d4, right? I mean, intending queen d4, queen takes g2 checkmate, but he can take on g7 with a check. So bishop d4 is not doing the job, but bishop h2 is a solution here. He cannot, if he moves the king to h1, I win the queen, right? So he resigned after bishop h2, because if he goes to f1, which is slightly better than king h1, I simply win by playing queen d3 check, and then I will win the rook b1 with a check, and I'm up a piece, and I would also be attacking, so an easily won position. Yeah, that game was quite entertaining, I hope, and if I may say so, it was played in the spirit of our hero Bela Perenyi, because he was a fantastic attacking player, and I'm not one of these very entertaining attacking players, but in this very game I hope I displayed some attacking skills. I hope you liked it. See you in the next video. Bye bye.